Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As a mom of two, sometimes I love to do something sentimental, so today I'm taking you step by step through my process for painting this beautiful mother and baby snow leopard. Let's jump in. I'm starting this painting using my favorite way to start, which is the wet and wet technique. I'm taking clean water and just brushing it all over the kitten, just avoiding the whisker areas. While the paper's still wet, I'm dropping in a little bit of burnt umber and some yellow ochre and just letting it bloom all over the surface. I'm swiping the top of the head just to soften that edge. I'm also adding a little bit of brown inside of the ear and some yellow ochre to warm up certain areas of the fur. I'm going in already with some indigo to indicate the shape of the ear, and then a little bit of watered down phthalo blue to add some cooler areas within the white fur. You can see I'm alternating between warm and cool, and even though the snow leopard kitten is technically white, there really won't be any white on the kitten himself. Taking some watered down indigo, I'm starting to indicate where the whiskers are going by just painting carefully in between them. My main colors I'm using for this, of course, are indigo, burnt umber, and a little bit of ultramarine and phthalo blue, just for some cool hints within the shadows. I'm kind of scumbling my brush and then adding some dark indigo to indicate the shadow on the kitten's leg. I'm having a lot of fun with this first wash of color, just using lots of blotchy, watered down paint and adding texture here and there to indicate fur. And I'm just alternating between warm and cool colors as I see them in my reference photo. The mother cat's whiskers are overlapping the kitten, so I'm carefully painting around those. I would say the whiskers are probably what took me the longest to paint, just because I had to be the most careful and really slow down. I'm using watered down phthalo blue for the shadow underneath the chin, and then just continuing to add these details, darker colors in between the whiskers. I'm not fully committing with black just yet because I want to make sure that my drawing with the paint is accurate. I can always go darker, but it's not so easy to go lighter. I've switched to a smaller brush for these details in between the whiskers, and I am starting to layer a second layer of darker paint over the top of my first wash. While I do this, I can start adding some texture, some fur details. You don't ever want to make all of your brush strokes exactly the same direction, especially when you're painting fur. Pay careful attention to your reference photo and try to make them going in the direction that the fur is growing. I'm now on my third layer of dark colors in between those whiskers. You'll want to make sure that when you're layering color or glazing, that you're letting the first layer completely dry before adding more value over the top. Otherwise, you'll end up with some blotchy paint and might accidentally even lift some color, which is not what we want when we're going darker. Sometimes you can do dark colors with more of an immediate approach, such as you see on the mouth here and around the ears, where I'm just painting a single layer of dark paint. This effect tends to look a lot more spontaneous, and I really like the look of it for the spots and for the shapes around the ears. I'm now adding some water all over the mother's head and then dropping in some blotchy color to indicate shadow shapes and just letting it bloom and bleed on the paper. The fun thing about painting fur is that you don't have to worry about getting smooth, flat washes because fur looks fuzzy. So if you end up with blooms on your paper, use those to your advantage and make them just part of your beautiful painting. I'm adding a couple of drip effects, which is where I just let the paint drip all the way to the bottom. You have to tilt your board to achieve this effect, and make sure you catch your extra paint with a towel. And then I'm adding some tan color along the right side of the cat to start to outline the shape of the cat's head. And again, alternating between warm and cool colors in the subtle shadows and inside of the mother cat's head. These first washes are very, very light. I want to build up my layers gradually, and I start adding detail once I have those first washes in. If you end up with any hard edges, you can gently scrub them out with a clean, damp brush. Now that the kitten is dry, I can go in with another layer on top of the head. To do the spots on a fuzzy little cat's head, I like to use the wet and wet technique for this also. So I'm brushing on some watered down paint, again alternating between warm and cool color temperatures. It might look really ugly at this point, but don't worry, once you add the spots, it'll start to come together. Just make sure that you're paying attention to your values and getting the shapes correct within your values. Before we go to the next part of the video, I just want to let you guys know that this tutorial is available in real time. Just head over to emilyolsonart.com where you can access all of my fully narrated real-time tutorials for just a small amount per month. I also include a sketch and reference photo with those tutorials, as well as a list of all the supplies I use so that you can follow the exact steps to paint along with me. With the Fearless Artist membership, you have access to my Watercolor Jumpstart video course, which is the perfect place to start if you're brand new to watercolor. There's also a series of 20-minute tutorials that will help sharpen your skills and give you delightful, frame-worthy little wins in your watercolor journey. And join our private Facebook group where you can share all of your amazing artwork and get feedback from other artists. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can see all the tutorials that are currently available, and I'm adding more every month. All right, let's get back to the video. Even though it might look a little bit ugly at this phase, we're working towards the goal of building a beautiful foundation of layers of color for the spots to go over the top. Remember that white fur is never completely white, so I'm carefully studying my reference photo and making sure that I'm getting a nice variety of color temperature and that I have a good value contrast between the shadows and the light areas. Once again, I'm doing another layer on the top of the kitten's head, and then just adding some more fur texture to the feet, and a nice dark shadow shape inside of the ear. You can use a small brush for this and just do side-to-side brush stroke motions to create fur texture. I'm going darker with the shadow shapes underneath the mouth and next to the whiskers and beginning to indicate my first couple of spots. I've switched to my size 4 round brush, and this nice synthetic brush has springy bristles that work really well for these spots. I'm also starting to paint on the eyes. Sometimes you might lose your pencil sketch underneath some of the layers of paint, so you have to rely on your drawing skills to paint in all of the spots and to get the structure of the head just right. I prefer doing it this way over perhaps drawing too dark and then being able to see your pencil lines underneath. I think this looks much better. One more layer of dark shadow between the whiskers, and I think this is beginning to approach the correct value in the shadows. I'm using indigo and burnt umber, which is my favorite mixture for creating black, and that's what I'm using for the shadows and for the spots and for the eyes. You'll notice the spots are not just circles. I'm using side-to-side quick little brush strokes to indicate fur all around the edges of those spots because it's all overlapping. The white fur overlaps the black fur, and you see a lot of texture and a lot of soft edges around those spots. Paint slowly and carefully around those whiskers, but don't worry if it doesn't look just like the reference photo. After all, fur is moving all the time and changing shape, so be okay with it if one of your spots ends up in a different place than you see it in the reference photo. But always be looking out for good design and try to align your spots in areas where you feel like it'll have good balance and will only serve the painting rather than detract from it. Now for the top of our little kitten's soft fuzzy head, I'm starting with some water, and then I'm just dropping in the spots. Naturally, they're starting to bloom and bleed on the wet surface, which is helping me out, and it also looks just more naturally soft than if I was trying to manufacture that fur with the tip of my brush. As you paint the spots towards the eyes and closer to the middle of the head, you can go darker and with a little harder edges there. Continue to add shadows where you need to go darker in value. And to help the spots blend a little bit, you can soften them with a clean, damp brush just by scrubbing around the edges of those spots. If the paint bleeds a little, use that to your advantage and make it look like fur texture. Moving on to the mother big cat here, we're going to paint in the nostrils pretty much with pure black and kind of outline some of those shapes. Make sure that it's lightly painted on and not at all garish. For the spots, I'm using the same technique of just using kind of a side-to-side scrubbing motion and the negative painting around the white fur on the chin. Sometimes you can splay the bristles of your brush a little bit and spread them out so that you have the tiny ends of your brush working for you to create that fur texture. In areas like the nose, I like to put on a nice flat wash. For the mother snow leopard's nose, I'm using a combination of alizarin crimson and transparent orange, watered down. And then just gently dabbing on more detail, more fur texture. Lots of tiny brush strokes here. You have to have a lot of patience for this kind of painting. I'm adding in the details on the kitten's big paw. Watered down indigo and burnt umber serving well to create a nice mid-tone gray for these details. The fur underneath the mother cat's chin is just a little bit longer, so you can use a little bit longer brush strokes. Always be adjusting your brush motion to what you see in your reference photo and match your brush strokes to the direction that the fur is growing. I'm now painting on the spots on the mother cat. And again, just softening the edges of some of those spots with a nice watered down, almost dry brush. I find that this helps make spots look a little bit more realistic when you soften some of the edges. The center area of the mother cat's face is still a little too light, so I'm adding some subtle mid-tone values to darken up as needed. And the inside of the ear is just a nice gray. I'm leaving white all around her eye and in the chin, but I'm going to need to add a few more fur details to make it look realistic and not so flat. So here I'm taking the tips of my size 12 round brush and just pulling some gray paint upward and around the base of the mouth to indicate more texture and shape within the fur. There are so many different things you can do with a round brush to create texture. Adding a few more spots on the forehead and a couple of little black whiskers on each eye. And our kitten needs a few more whiskers too. If you feel like the values between the white whiskers are still too light, feel free to add another layer to darken it up. A final detail that's starting to make it look even more realistic is adding all of these little dots on the mother cat's face. I'm negative painting around a couple of whiskers on the right side too. And if you accidentally paint over areas where you would have liked to have a white whisker, don't fear. If you have some white gouache on hand or even white acrylic paint, you can always paint those white whiskers back in. Be sure to continue to soften your edges whenever you're painting spots. You can see I'm kind of scumbling along the edges of these black dots just to soften and make it look more blended and realistic. And one of my spots is right behind the whisker, so you can carefully paint just around those white areas. Make sure your whiskers are straight. For a final fun little touch, I'm adding tiny little brush strokes with just some phthalo blue for some pops of cool color in the painting. And then I'm also adding a little bit of white gouache to indicate just a couple more whiskers. Make sure that your painting is completely dry before you add these. For my background, I'm just using some watered down undersea green to indicate a lovely verdant background. And there is our finished snow leopard mother and baby. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.